Hello, Nicole.
Hello.
Why don't you introduce yourself, where you're running, and give a little brief introduction to our listeners.
I'm from Beaconsfield, Quebec, and I'm running for mayor. My name is Nicole Corrado, and what drove me to run for mayor of Beaconsfield is because I wanted change.
Of course. At this point, you've probably started doing some outreach. I saw you had an article in the Suburban. So how's that been going? We're in the middle of the process now.
It's pretty good. I did another interview yesterday with the Suburban and another interview with 1510 West.
Okay, nice. Cool. Is there anything in particular that's that you didn't expect that you would have, going into the running for mayor, any surprises, anything that's, that you weren't used to or you didn't expect going into it?
Well, I didn't expect that I would only need 10 signatures to run for mayor because I thought I would actually have needed 50.
Yeah.
So I got 68 signatures, but it turned out I only needed 10 actually.
Oh, wow.
It's because I didn't realize that Beaconsfield is under 20,000 people.
Is it?
It is. It's just under 20,000,
Okay.
and it's in decline because there's not a lot of people moving to Beaconsfield.
Yeah, it's very expensive.
Well, that's interesting you say that. Parts of it are, but I don't have a lot of money, and not everybody there does. Beaconsfield is actually almost like two different places because you have Beaconsfield south of the 20 and south of the tracks, which is generally richer. And I live south of the tracks, but I rent a basement apartment. And then you have the north of the tracks, especially near Boulevard Saint Charles, which is not very rich. And there's actually a lot of affordable housing along Elm Street north of the tracks.
Mm. Nice, yeah. I remember I went to Beaconsfield High School, so I've ran through Beaconsfield many times, whether it's the parks by the lake or whether it's going to the Depenars right north of the 20. So I have I think all my childhood is just in Beaconsfield, honestly. So was there a particular moment that inspired you to run?
I think when I first moved to Beaconsfield back in 2023 from Toronto, it was a bit of a culture shock. I noticed that there was a lot of inaccessibility. So there's for example, Boulevard Saint Charles, the crossing is not very safe. Just recently, an elderly man was hit and died. And because the crosswalks, they don't have anything tactile, and they're too short in duration. It's only 30 seconds. It should be a minute, and it doesn't really allow for a person who moves slowly, and the buttons don't even work. And the other thing is also there's no tactile to show where the bus stops are. There's the large steps to Beaconsfield, so you can't get there, if you have any mobility aid. And even Gare Repair has 2 steps and no ramps. So there's a lot of accessibility challenges in Beaconsfield. Also, if you don't drive, if you live up on Elm, all along Elm, there's no transit. Now, there's talk of putting a bus along Montrose, but it would make sense if there was a bus all the way along Elm, because a bus on Montrose won't help the people further along Elm. Mm. And the other thing also that struck me is that they don't, even though it's a PETA certified compassionate city, the only animal shelter there is a tiny little dog pound at 303A Beaconsfield Boulevard, behind Urblinder Annex and behind the library, with 3 tiny cages that are probably about the size of this table here. Mm. Each cage, maybe a little. Well, actually, no. It's probably maybe about this tall, but probably this length. It's probably about and it actually looks like this table here. That's what there is, and it's in a little storage shed. So that's what they have. for animal services. It's just for lost dogs. They have no spay-neuter programs. They have no microchip programs. They have no vaccine programs. They don't have any programs for animals other than dogs. There's no humane education programs, and the pound is not even open to the public. So that really disappointed me.
Do you find, are these things available in the private sector, or do you think there's just a gap?
They would be available maybe in the private sector, but that's the thing. Not everybody can afford what's in the private sector because Beaconsfield is not as rich as it appears. The problem I find with Beaconsfield is it seems to hide the poverty. One thing, when I first moved to Beaconsfield, one thing that really struck me was there was this woman who was probably homeless, who was yelling at me and calling me names and calling my mother names, but I was not mad at her because I knew she had it rough and she seemed like she was in mental health crisis. So my mother went over and got one of the public security staff to come over, and they said, oh, no, we don't deal with that. We'll call the police. And I'm thinking, police really shouldn't be handling this. This should be handled by a mental health crisis service that has nothing to do with police. You know, the way I would resolve the $20 million lawsuit against the City of Montreal regarding the agglomerated taxes is to defund largely the police, because the police are taking most of the money, and most of the agglomerated taxes to police are going into mental health services, mental health calls, and they're not trained or really equipped to handle those. In Toronto, they have the Community Crisis Service, which is a service that's all civilians. There's no police. It's just civilians. It's just social workers and people with lived experience of mental health challenges. And that's a far calmer and far better response. It costs a lot less money. It could be done at the city level rather than the agglomerated level. It would save a lot of money. It would save a lot of lives. And it also, it would serve the same purpose, but provide a much better service. It works so well in Toronto that now Dartmouth, Nova Scotia is now implementing the same service that Toronto has.
Yeah, one thing I say I'll admire about your campaign is, like, many times most people that I've talked to any which way, whether they're my neighbors, whether they're, people get so hung up on overarching politics and rhetoric, and it's so polarizing, and that's one of the reasons why I kind of feel disoriented by federal elections, is because it's so like us, them, us. Like, one thing I do appreciate is when, as you're talking to me, you're giving me very specific issues that you see in your town. And I do think that's important. Instead of just giving a general message of, we need to be progressive and we need to work together and we need to look for a brighter tomorrow, you're saying, hey, this one street needs more access to transportation. The city says they're, you said, what was the accreditation for animal?
PETA certified.
You said they're PETA certified, but actually, this is how the their pound works, and this is where they lack in services, and this is actually what's going on. So I really have to admire that. Is there any so I guess my question was going to be, what are some policies that you really want to work towards? But I guess you already started answering that. I guess I'll ask the next question is, what's your vision of the town? What do you want Beaconsfield to be?
Well, what I want Beaconsfield to be is actually an inclusive town, a really accessible town. One of the biggest culture shocks when I moved to Beaconsfield from Toronto was how unicultural it looked. So, for example, Toronto is multicultural. Toronto, is multi-use, whereas Beaconsfield, it's all people who are who all look pretty much the same and all pretty much just think the same way and talk the same way. It was really a culture shock, but it's changing, and that's not all of Beaconsfield, and that's not really what Beaconsfield is. That's what the current Beaconsfield administration maybe wants you to think it is, but that's not really what it is, because the closer you look, you do see more multiculturalism. You do see different abilities. You do see different neurotypes. You also see different orientations. For example, Beaconsfield actually has the West Island LGBTQ Center at the Beaconsfield United Church, and of course, that's not really accessible from most buses. You have to take several, like I think you have to take the 200 and walk, but if you put a bus on Elm, you could probably get to it much easier. But that's an example. That's in Beaconsfield, but a lot of Beaconsfield is hidden. So I want to create a city where everyone feels welcome. So nobody feels excluded. Nobody feels like they don't fit in.
Yeah. That's a powerful message. Now, I guess one of the reasons why I started this initiative, if that's what we'll call it, is just because I saw that only 22% of people in my age bracket, 18 to 24, voted in the Montreal municipal election. And for how much my age group tends to talk about politics and policies and, really even engage quite a bit with identity politics, I noticed. What are some, 22% is very low, especially when it comes down to policies that directly affect you. The park bench you sit on, the park you go at, the facilities you have access to. As you said, maybe if your neighbor uses a wheelchair, well, this voting decides, how accessible things are for them. And it seems like the most tangible results for, at least in our physical lives, in front of us, what we see. And it must, what are some of the things that you are doing that you think would appeal to the youth to maybe encourage more youth voters to kind of hit the polls?
Well, I think getting more information out there. For one thing, many of the municipalities in the West Island have acclaimed mayors. For example, your city of Baie-D'Urfé, the mayor is acclaimed, which means the mayor, wins by default. And the city councilor was just sworn in yesterday being acclaimed because nobody else ran against them. So that the same as in Kirkland, they have an acclaimed mayor, and they have an acclaimed mayor in DDO, which is actually quite sad because that creates apathy. I mean, nobody ran, and it's actually so easy to run. So, surprisingly, I found the forms on Dorval's website, but they're the same forms for every municipality. Mm. They make it so much easier here, like on Dorval, than they do elsewhere. I think there's not enough motivation or not enough education. I think they should be talking to the CEGEPs, talking to the high schools, and I think eventually also lowering the voting age, because in Germany the municipal voting age is 15. So if you lowered it, that would really help.
I guess that would create more representation and maybe bring a lot of people in a younger age group to get engaged with it earlier on and kind of set the habit. So that's a good idea. I didn't hear about that one before. Now, how do you balance, because a lot of times policies that might appeal to the older voting crowd, which is the crowd that generally tends to vote, might not be the policies that might create a lot of apathy in the younger voters, and a lot of the progressive policies that might appeal to younger voters might be scary for the older voters. How do you find the balance in between those things? Well,
I think age-friendly municipality, what that actually means is it actually means a universal design. It means an accessible city. So I think if you put it as universal design, so it's designed for all ages, it's age-friendly means it's accessible, I think anybody can be behind that. some of the ideas that appeal more to younger voters, that older voters might have problems like with my idea of defunding police. I think you have to explain what that means. Defunding police does not mean the police get no funding, and it does not mean that there's no police. What defunding police means is that you take a portion of the money that's used for policing that isn't for criminal matters, isn't for what police are actually assigned for, and you reallocate those funds to other services that would be able to manage those situations in a better way. That's what it means. So explaining what the policies actually mean and designing them universally. So you don't design them for one age group or the other age group, because then you're excluding. If you say it's just for young people, you're excluding people who are over a certain age. If you say it's only for over a certain age, you're excluding for under a certain age, because somebody might benefit. Sometimes, the 55 plus club in Beaconsfield does not actually have in its bylaw that you have to be 55 plus. I think I joined it because they have some activities that are fun, that I enjoy. And at 38, I've joined the 55 plus club. It's just called 55 plus club. That's just its name. But, for there's an example right there. Things are not necessarily designed for a certain age or not. They don't necessarily have an age cutoff. I still love the store Babar Books. It's a children's bookstore, but I absolutely love Babar Books.
Yeah, great guy.
It doesn't have an age limit. Yeah,
that's true. I do find that illustration gets kind of boring after as we try to get more and more serious, whereas the margins that we allow in a lot of kids illustration tends to be so creative, because maybe they'll try to think from a child's mind, but we shouldn't lose that. So exactly. I do agree with that. And now I guess I'll ask about you, just so the voters can connect. What are your hobbies, interests? What do you do in your free time?
Well, what I am is a visual artist, so I like to draw realistic animals, but also whimsical, children's book illustration. So I draw, different animals and animal characters, and often with colored pencil. I also love music, especially classical music, jazz, and religious music. I like to go to different religious services. Yeah. So I like to go to different churches and synagogues and that. And I'm studying divinity online through Acadia Divinity College. I'll be starting that in January. So that's something, I want to go into is theology, but also bring theology into music and art together. But I'm also do some writing for the Animal Defense and Anti-Vivisection Society of BC. I am vegan, and I'm big into animal rights and animal protection. That, as I've already mentioned, both the animal services that I want to bring in. But yeah, that's another thing that I like to do. But yeah, but in my free time, I like to hang out at religious places and do art and music, and just hang out with people who share those interests.
Yeah, that's cool. And if you wanted to, so what facilities would you want to add into Beaconsfield where you think that would be more engaging in that sense? Well,
I already mentioned I'd like to, better animal services. One of the things I would do with the library is being moved. They're building a new library and cultural center, which should absolutely be beautiful, and it's going to be accessible. They're building that across the street. So the old library is going to have a lot of space. Now, they said, we're going to put offices in there. Well, you could put offices in there, but there still will be a whole lot of space. So I think you could put an animal shelter in there as well. And it's not without precedent, because in Markham, they have their animal shelter, I believe, is actually in their library. So an old library could be definitely converted. Part of it could be converted into an animal shelter. The other thing I would want, and they're putting this into the new library, but they may just be focusing it on kids, is having a space for neurodivergent people to be able to hang out. As a person on the autism spectrum, you know, one of the things I found it very difficult because there wasn't anybody else. I know autistic people, like my cousins live just, you know, they're practically neighbors and I see them a lot, but there isn't a space for neurodivergent people to hang out. And they're going to be building that in the library, which is great. But they may be focusing it more on kids and more on teens. That may not, again, the age cutoff thing. I would like to have something that's created by and for the neurodivergent community, so that you know, anybody can go there, so that people feel included. They feel they have a place, similar to how the LGBTQ center is at the Beaconsfield United Church. And that's the other thing. The churches and houses of worship, they are community centers. They are community hubs, and I would work closer with them. I think the whole secularization thing that Quebec has is quite ridiculous, because faith communities are communities, and they've contributed so much to social services, to public services, that basically every house of worship is essentially a community center. And you could definitely, this city could utilize more of those already existing spaces.
Yeah, I see that angle. That, like, they are places of congregation, right? And so many of us, you know, do interact with those spaces and kind of incorporating. I think some Quebecers, a lot of people do have are kind of wary of it, just because there's like a long history with the church and state in Quebec specifically. But I do think like there is a lot of nuance there on how that is to be presented in, you know, society today. You know, because, you know, completely shunning those spaces and pretending that they're not community centers when they raise our communities, you know, I don't think that's responsible either. You know, before the camera runs out of time, is there anything, last message you want to say to voters right before, you know, election day?
I think that people should get out and vote. They don't have to vote for me, but get out and vote for somebody, and research the candidates, look up what their platform is, and consider what is important to you, what are your values, and find somebody who aligns best with your values and vote for them.
That's a good message. Okay, wow.